Elena Monsalve was born on September 8, 1967, and went by the nickname Mo. At the age of 46, she lived in Hawaii and was described as a very devoted and compassionate mother. Mo was a native of Annapolis, Maryland, and graduated from Broadneck High School in 1985. In 2012, Mo met Bernard Brown and fell in love. Within a year, she and her teenage son, Tyson, had moved in with him at Ia Parkside Apartments in Wailuku. However, by the end of 2013, the relationship had become volatile, and Mo told family and friends that she feared him. They broke up, and she and her son, who was a high school senior at the time, moved out. On January 12, 2014, Mo and Tyson spent part of the afternoon on the University of Hawaii Maui College campus. Afterward, Mo left in her 1994 Buick, and Tyson left in their Kia Soul. That night, Tyson stayed at a friend's place, and for some unknown reason, Mo went to Brown's apartment. She was last seen by a witness at his apartment between 10 and 10:30 p.m. Sadly, Tyson had no idea that after parting ways that day with his mom, he would never see her again. On January 14th, a coworker of Mo's found her car at a local repair shop and reported it to the police. That's also when a missing persons report was filed. Police went to the repair shop, found the car, and had it impounded. Investigators then questioned Brown, who said that someone came and picked Mo up from the apartment while he was asleep. He said she left her car there because it was having issues, and he had dropped it off at the repair shop on the 13th, the day after she was last seen. Strangely, on the morning after Mo was last seen, multiple acquaintances recalled Brown sounding distressed and urgently trying to liquidate belongings for cash because he said he was going to leave the island. He eventually moved to California a month later. At the time, he was only considered a person of interest. Between January 15th and 16th, Mo's pink Coach purse was discovered in a dumpster near the Velma McWayne Santos Community Center. It contained her work ID, documents, and a smashed cell phone. Interestingly, the dumpster was within walking distance of Brown's apartment unit. Thankfully, technicians were able to repair the phone. Over the next few days, Maui police and the FBI pursued leads, interviewed witnesses, and searched Brown's apartment and the Buick. In September 2019, even without a body, investigators charged Brown with second-degree murder. During the trial in 2022, prosecutors presented testimony about Brown's statements and movements in the hours after Mo was last seen, as well as the disposal of her belongings near his residence. The defense argued the investigation fixated on Brown, that other leads, including potential credit card use by others, weren't fully explored, and that there was no physical evidence proving a killing or disposal. A jury saw it differently and convicted Brown of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life behind bars in January 2023, with the possibility of parole. Tragically, Mo's father took his own life in 2024. If you know anything about the location of Mo's remains, please contact the Maui Police Department at 808-244-6400. Her children desperately want to bury their mother. Morgan Keyanna Martin was born on December 1, 1994. At 17, she lived with her family in the 2800 block of 17th Avenue South in St. Petersburg, Florida. Morgan was 4 months pregnant, and the father of the baby was allegedly 24-year-old Jacoby Rashad Flowers. Morgan was excited about the pregnancy and had begun saving money from her job at a Checkers restaurant. She found out the baby was a girl and wanted to name her Jalea Raquel. Her family had accepted it, but Jacoby wasn't happy about it. Just after midnight on July 25, 2012, Morgan told her mother and sister she was stepping outside to talk to someone. She was planning to show Jacoby the sonogram of the fetus and to talk things over. She was last seen sitting in a chair just outside the front door, wearing gray sweatpants, a white tank top, and pink slippers. A witness saw a white car in the driveway, but didn't see Morgan approach it. However, she never came back inside and has never been heard from again. She left behind her purse, the sonogram, and other belongings, and her phone was the only thing missing. About a year later, police reclassified the case from missing person to homicide. In 2016, a grand jury indicted Jacoby Flowers for first-degree murder. He was already in custody on unrelated charges and due for release on July 1st of that year. Flowers told police he knew Morgan, but claimed he hadn't seen her for months. He also denied getting her pregnant and said their online messages about the pregnancy were just playing make-believe. Since investigators had verifiable information that Flowers didn't want the baby because he was already supporting 3 children, they kept him on their suspect list. They then used cell tower records to track Flowers' movements the night Morgan disappeared. They discovered he drove to the area around Morgan's home, then to his own home, then to a restaurant on Seminole Boulevard, where he worked the closing shift. Afterward, he visited the mother of 2 of his other children, returned to the restaurant, then made a loop around Tampa Bay, up to Pasco County, over to Brandon, and back to St. Petersburg via the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. In spring 2022, Flowers reached a plea agreement and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The deal would give him 25 years in prison if he led police to Morgan's remains, and 40 years if he didn't. After accepting the deal, he told police that Morgan was buried in a 4-foot-deep grave in Pike County, Alabama, about 450 miles from where she disappeared. Authorities brought cadaver dogs and an excavator to a site off US 231, and even brought Flowers to direct them, but found nothing. Per the agreement, he was sentenced to 40 years, and Morgan's remains have never been found. Morgan had a distinct Spanish-language tattoo on her right hip. The authorities have her familial DNA, dental records with X-rays, and fingerprints on file. If you know where Morgan is, call Crime Stoppers of Pinellas at 1-800-873-TIPS. Even a small detail about Pike County, Alabama, or Flowers' movements in July 2012 could bring her home. Nakota Blake Kelly was born on May 25, 2010, to Haley Kelly and Anthony DeBaya. At 10 years old, he lived with his mother in Wabash, Indiana, and every other weekend he would visit his father in Indianapolis. Anthony was born in Nigeria as Ejike Ibe and lived and worked in the U.S. under a stolen identity. He used multiple aliases, and in 2012 he pleaded guilty to Social Security fraud, identity theft, and document misuse, ultimately serving a 34-month federal sentence. Immigration authorities attempted to deport him, but Nigeria declined to accept him. After his release, he returned to Indiana, and in 2016, a court granted him every other weekend visitation with Nakota. Between 2017 and 2020, the Indiana Department of Child Services investigated 4 complaints alleging abuse and neglect during visits, including an accidental double dose of ADHD medication during Nakota's first overnight stay in January 2017. Other reports alleged physical incidents and threats. However, each complaint was ruled unsubstantiated. The court did not order supervised visitation. Nakota played Little League and often missed weekend games because of the visitation schedule. His coach described him as a very talented player who he felt one day could play professionally. Unfortunately, he would never get the chance after disappearing during a weekend stay with his so-called father. On July 17, 2020, Haley allowed Nakota to play his final game of the season, even though he was supposed to be picked up at 6 p.m. by his father. After the game, they ran by the house before going to the meetup place in Kokomo, arriving at 9:15 p.m. DeBaya was already upset with Nakota because on July 14th, he had hung up on his dad and told his mother, "Oh, I'm dead. Don't expect me to come home. My dad is going to kill me." This was relayed to the Indiana Department of Child Services, but they allowed the upcoming weekend visit anyway. At 7:36 p.m. on July 19th, Nakota called his mother from his father's apartment. He said he had eaten, was watching YouTube, told his mother he loved her, and expected to be picked up at 9:30 p.m. About 2 hours later, Dabaya phoned a relative in Texas and repeatedly said, "I just killed my son." Police arrived at 10:11 p.m., heard movement inside, and saw his white Jeep Patriot in the parking lot, but they didn't force entry after a supervisor advised there was no pressing calls. Let me repeat that for y'all. Police received a report of a murder and did not investigate further than the apartment door. I honestly don't know how a person could come to the conclusion that the report wasn't a pressing issue. Since police didn't stick around, Dabaya was free to go as he pleased, and that's exactly what he did. Overnight surveillance showed the Jeep leaving and returning several times between 2:27 a.m. and 7:44 a.m. on July 20th. After 8:30 a.m., surveillance showed Dabaya going in and out of the apartment 3 different times. On one trip, he discarded a bag in the apartment's dumpster. Later that morning, he called a friend to borrow a suitcase, again admitting he had killed Nakota and saying he suffocated him in a plastic bag and dumped the body. That friend called 911, and this time, the police finally decided to enter the apartment. Using the manager's key, they gained access at 11:43 a.m., but Dabaya and Nakota were gone. Inside, investigators found matter on the bathroom floor and blood on the bedroom walls, floor, and ceiling, with additional blood in the entryway. The blood was later tested, and the DNA matched Nakota. Blood was also found in the back of the Jeep that matched Nakota. At 2:01 p.m., Dabaya texted Haley the following message, and I quote, "Sometimes I hear voices. My son is in heaven." Police tracked his phone across Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. At 4 p.m., the Missouri State Highway Patrol stopped the Jeep in Macon County and arrested him, but Nakota wasn't with him. He was taken into custody and charged with his son's murder. In September 2023, Dabaya pleaded the following, guilty but mentally ill. He admitted to strangling and dismembering his son. He was then sentenced to 52 years in prison, which was 3 less than the maximum. He will also have access to psychiatric treatment. Sadly, he had continued to refuse the disclosure of his son's body. After the ordeal, Haley filed a wrongful death lawsuit against DCS. If you saw a white Jeep Patriot in Indianapolis late at night between July 19th and 20th in 2020, or along routes in Illinois or Missouri that weekend, or remember a suitcase, plastic bags, or a discarded computer or phone that could be connected to this case, please contact the Indianapolis Police at 317-327-3475 or Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana at 317-262-TIPS. Even a small memory involving dumpsters, storage units, or rural pull-offs could help bring Nakota home. Sierra Mae LaMar was born on October 19, 1996, in Fremont, California. At the age of 15, she lived in Morgan Hill, California, with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. She was a sophomore and a cheerleader at Ann Sobrato High. Unfortunately, she would never make it to her junior year. On Friday, March 16, 2012, at 6:29 a.m., she sent her last tweet and set out to walk to the bus stop near Palm and Doherty to catch the 7:35 a.m. bus. At 7:11, she texted a friend to meet her before class to discuss homework. Sadly, she never boarded the bus, never arrived at school, and never met her friend. Her mother learned she was missing that evening when the school called about her absence. The next day, on March 17th, searchers found Sierra's cell phone in a field about 3/4 of a mile from her home and in the opposite direction of the bus route. Investigators believe the phone was thrown from a vehicle because there were no tracks around it. On March 18th, her bag was found near a shed off Laguna Avenue, along with her school books. Inside the bag were the clothes she'd left home in, which included her San Jose Sharks sweatshirt, jeans, bra, underwear, shoes, socks, keys, inhaler, and lunch money. Investigators also noted that her jeans had a strong smell of urine. However, there was still no sign of Sierra. The Class Kids Foundation organized ongoing volunteer searches while deputies used dogs, air units, and dive teams to probe nearby reservoirs. But even with all those efforts, Sierra remained missing. Then forensic testing on the clothing produced a male DNA profile that matched to an individual in the California's arrestee database. That man was Antolin Garcia Torres. Investigators surveilled him for a period of time at his job at Safeway. They had seized his red 1998 Volkswagen Jetta on April 7, 2012, and after further lab work, arrested him on May 21st for Sierra's kidnapping and murder. Investigators reported Sierra's DNA in the Jetta and a hair consistent with Sierra on a rope in the trunk. Right before he kidnapped Sierra, police charged him with 3 prior attempted kidnappings of women in the parking lot of the Morgan Hill Safeway. At trial, prosecutors showed these crimes as pattern evidence. Garcia Torres was convicted in 2017 and sentenced to life without parole. Although he and Sierra lived 7 miles apart, there's no evidence that they ever met before her disappearance. And as of October 2025, Sierra's remains have never been found. Victoria Lynn Prokopovitz was born on September 10, 1953, and went by Vicki. At 59, she lived with her husband, James Prokopovitz, in the 5100 block of Kunesh Road in Pittsfield Township, Wisconsin. Unfortunately, that's also where she would disappear from in the spring of 2013. On April 25, 2013, James claimed he saw Vicki at home around 10 p.m. before going to bed. He said when he woke up at 4 a.m., she was nowhere to be found. Strangely, her cell phone, cigarettes, purse, and ID were all still in the home. Also, investigators found no shoe prints outside, suggesting no one walked away from the property that night. Before her disappearance, Vicki had been diagnosed with colon cancer and needed a colonostomy. After recovering and having the bag removed, she remained physically weak and sometimes was forced to walk with a cane. On top of that, long walks were out of the question. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies and contradictions in James's account. For example, he told investigators he panicked and began driving around searching for her. However, the gas station video didn't show his truck on the route he claimed he took, and cell phone records didn't support the calls he said he made. Initially, he told officers that he went to bed around 10 p.m., but the bed looked as if it had been meticulously made. Later, he claimed he slept in a recliner. The next day, he went to work, didn't tell coworkers she was missing, and acted as if nothing was wrong. Moreover, the family said he didn't help with searches and stated, and I quote, "She is dead. She is never coming back." Within weeks, James began dating his old girlfriend, Catherine Friday, who went by Kathy. Witnesses said he told Kathy that he knew for sure Vicki was dead. However, investigators soon learned that the two had been having an affair that stretched on before Vicki went missing. Kathy had even gotten a second phone for the sole purpose of communicating with James. Months after Vicki's disappearance, James switched insurance from family to individual, removing her from coverage. Their house was also facing foreclosure. 6 years later, on May 8, 2019, during a secret John Doe hearing, which is basically a grand jury in Wisconsin, Kathy was caught lying under oath. She was then arrested and charged with perjury, conspiracy to commit perjury, and obstruction. For those charges, she pleaded no contest. After being released, she was given a no-contact order with James. She was then caught using a third party to pass messages to James and was subsequently hit with a bail-jumping charge. After that same John Doe hearing, James admitted to lying for years about the case. He also told about the efforts he went through to keep his story straight to Kathy. However, he still denied killing Vicki. Regardless, he was still arrested and charged with her murder, and just like Kathy, he received a perjury and obstruction charge. In November 2020, before Kathy could be sentenced for the perjury charges, she took her own life. In 2021, 75-year-old James was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, obstructing an officer, and perjury. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Vicki's remains, investigators believe he might have dumped her in a sludge pond at the paper job he worked. He had access and likely knew the ponds were unsearchable. Marcia Loritz, Vicki's daughter, says she and James were close. She even called him Dad. This has made his betrayal that much worse. As a result of her mother's death, Marcia now hosts an annual Missing Persons Awareness event at the Brown County Sheriff's Office. She also founded the Wisconsin Missing Persons Advocacy nonprofit to help families of the missing. Vicki had scars on her abdomen and arms, a tattoo of a rose on her breast, and a tattoo of a skunk on the back of her hip. She wore eyeglasses and dentures, was a heavy smoker, and stood between 5'3" and 5'6", and weighed about 120 pounds. Unfortunately, as of October 2025, Vicki's remains have never been found.